All right, strap yourselves in, ladies and gentlemen. This is a topic that has long been in the back of my mind, and I'm finally going to tackle it today. Now, many of you may not know this, but the prog rock band Rush has always had a pesky little Canadian brother being thrown into the conversation as a ripoff of Rush. That band is called Triumph. In this video, I will be examining, is Triumph really a Rush ripoff band? This is Dancing with Ghosts. Now, there are a lot of curious parallels that you can draw between these two bands. They are both from Toronto, they are both three pieces with a bassist who also plays keyboards, and both of them have singers who have really high-pitched voices. And if the only song you've ever heard by Triumph is Fight the Good Fight, I could understand why you would write Triumph off as a Wish.com version of Rush. But honestly, that's where the comparisons end. The unfortunate aspect of Triumph's career is that they never reached the soaring heights of popularity that Rush did. So if you've heard anything by this band on the radio, it was probably either Lay It on the Line, Magic Power, or Fight the Good Fight. The three songs that sound the most Rushiest. However, Triumph was much more 70s hard rock than Rush were. Triumph consisted of guitarist / co-lead vocalist Rik Emmett, bassist / keyboardist Mike Levin, and drummer / co-lead vocalist Gil Moore. Triumph's first album came out in 1976, while Rush's first album debuted in 1974. Arguably, the two bands must have bumped into one another in Toronto back in the day, and probably even saw each other's shows at some point. When comparing the two debut albums, they both borrow heavily from Led Zeppelin and are trying to find their footing as their own unique bands. I would say Triumph had the stronger debut album with better overall studio production because, man, that first Rush record was rough around the edges to say the least. Also, Triumph implements two lead vocalists much like Kiss does. The reason I use Kiss as a specific example is because drummer Gil Moore's voice sounds oddly like Gene Simmons vocally. So any of the traditional 70s cock rock songs were handled by Gil, and any of the more pastoral, clean-sounding high vocals were handled by Rik Emmett. This automatically gives the band a bit of an edge over Rush because Geddy Lee is the sole lead vocalist on every single Rush song since the beginning of time, and you either loved his voice or you hated it. I personally much prefer Rik Emmett's voice over Gil Moore's, and funny enough, all of the songs that are mainly remembered by the casual listener have Rik doing lead vocals, so I guess most people preferred his voice over Gil's as well. It's more timeless to me to have those high cleans over that gruff, clearly 1970s way of singing that Gil Moore and Gene Simmons tried to emulate. But let's get back to the overall sounds of both bands. Rush sounded different on every single album, and the primary directive was constant musical evolution. Whatever new instruments or technology the boys could get their hands on, you would hear that on the next record. Whether it was new types of guitar pedals, electronic percussion, but specifically synthesizers. Rush was constantly evolving their sound, but still maintaining good songwriting, guitar solos, thoughtful lyrics, and insane musicianship from all three band members. Triumph, on the other hand, stayed the course of not deviating too far from their hard rock roots. Throughout all of their records from the 70s to the 90s, Triumph would dip their toe into the prog world or have a ballad or classical guitar piece, but overall, if you liked the spirit of that 70s swagger made famous by Zeppelin, that was the main ingredient in the Triumph sound. Now, again, if you only know their radio hits, then you might think they are a Rush ripoff band, but just listen to almost anything else they've done that isn't played on the radio, and you will hear the core Triumph sound. Now let's go a bit further and break down some other differences between Rush and Triumph. Drummer Gil Moore was not nearly as musically proficient as Neil Peart. I'm sorry, there's no contest here. Neil is leaps and bounds more talented a drummer than Gil Moore was. It's kind of unfair comparing anyone to Neil Peart because he really was a once-in-a-lifetime drummer. With that being said, Gil Moore has no problem playing very tasteful parts that fit the song, and some may even argue that Gil Moore is the better drummer because he sat in the pocket more and didn't do all of the flashy stuff that some musicians find annoying. But those people are wrong, and Neil Peart is God. Since we're on the topic of musicianship, bassist and keyboardist Mark Levine was no Geddy Lee on the bass guitar. His bass lines are very rudimentary, but they do fit the song, but you definitely won't win the nerds over by playing something simple. Us prog rock nerds like all that complex shit in the background that we can mull over for hours and try to figure out how they do that. How do you play that? You won't find that here. Levine also wasn't nearly as creative with the synth work that he did. Geddy went balls deep into synthesizers in the 1980s and constructed virtual symphonies of synthetic sound that I honestly love more and more as the years go on, especially given the fact that these were analog synthesizers that Geddy had to actually play by hand and couldn't just plug the notes into a computer that would perfectly sequence them into the song, kind of like they do nowadays. Rik Emmett, on the other hand, might be just slightly more talented a guitar player than Alex Lifeson, although it's really damn close. They are both beasts at playing leads, and they both play classical guitar. I think Lifeson has Emmett beat on the creativity field with all of the interesting variations he would make to his solos in the 1980s. Alex Lifeson was the king of the whammy bar in implementing odd guitar sound effects to make his solos stand out from the prototypical 1980s, I want to sound like Eddie Van Halen guitar solo. In Rick's favor, though, he has Alex beat as a classical guitarist, which can be heard on such tracks as Fantasy Serenade. Now let's talk about lyrics. Triumph talked about chicks a lot in their lyrics. It would not be unusual to hear words like babe or girl in numerous Triumph songs. Rush were almost too bashful to really talk about women or sex or love or any of that mushy shit that us nerds get tired of hearing about on traditional rock radio. I'm kind of showing my hand here on my preference, but I always appreciated Neil's very cerebral approach to lyric writing over the traditional girl, I want to love you all night long type of lyric that was played out even by the 1980s. With that being said, though, I'm sure Triumph had a lot more female fans in their audience than Rush did, and therefore probably got laid more on the road. So there's definitely something to be said about that. But even the songs that are seemingly about the same topic, take Triumph's Magic Power and Rush's Spirit of Radio. Both of these songs speak to the power and positivity of music, but when you compare the lyrics, she climbs into bed, she pulls the covers overhead, and she turns her little radio on. She's had a rotten day, so she hopes the DJ's gonna play her favorite song. Now, versus, all of this machinery making modern music can still be open-hearted, not so coldly charted, it's clearly just a question of your honesty. One likes to believe in the freedom of music, but glittering prizes and endless compromises shatter the illusion of integrity. Like, whoa! You can tell which lyricist read a shit ton of books growing up and which one didn't. Neil Peart is just shattering the fourth wall in Spirit of Radio and saying, yeah, music is great, but these record executives are ruining it, so let's have a broader discussion about that over fine Chianti, eh? Rush writes lyrics for the thinking man, the D&D player, the outcast. Triumph writes lyrics for a more broader audience, and that's fine, but for some reason all the nerds banded together and decided Rush was the band that truly spoke for them on all levels. So if you heard Fight the Good Fight on the radio that one time and thought, wow, this is a Rush song I've never heard before, only to find out that it's not Rush, and then to get pissed off and say, wow, what a ripoff band, much like I did back in the day, you are sadly ignorant, my friend, because Triumph and Rush, when you really boil it down, have very little in common outside of these surface level aspects. So be honest, did you even know who Triumph was before I made this video? And if so, what are your thoughts on them? Me personally, I just find Rush's music infinitely more interesting than Triumph's. I love the hits that they play on the radio by Triumph, but when I dug into their discography, there really wasn't much there that did anything for me, especially the songs that Gil, the drummer, sings on, and there are a lot of those. Let me know what you think in the comments, and until next time, have a good rest of your night.